Mental health is not the mystery that it once was. Although there's a lot of things we don't know about how the brain works or why people feel certain things or what makes it better, there also is a lot that we have figured out since the days of Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung and those early pioneers of psychology. There are many things that we can definitively say, if you do this thing, you will see some amount of improvement. The problem is that a lot of these proven strategies for improving mental health are difficult, uncomfortable, or unpleasant to implement. And a trap I see people get sucked into all the time is they keep looking for new solutions, new answers, new ideas, not because they don't have any solutions, but because they don't like the solutions they have. They don't want to implement the things that they already know. And so they spend hours and hours reading books, listening to podcasts, watching YouTube videos to try to find an easier, faster, or more convenient way to make the changes they already know they should be making. And the thing about this is, it's at best this is procrastination, at worst it's avoidance. Sometimes we need to stop acquiring new information and focus on applying the information we already have. And rather than looking for that magic bullet, so to speak, work on creating a foundation combined with all of the things we already know are definitely going to help us if we could get them going. When I hear somebody in therapy say, I've tried everything, what they usually mean is, I've tried everything that I want to try. And so that's why today, instead of presenting a new concept, I'm going to review some things that you probably already know. But what I am hoping to do is maybe present them in a new or novel way that will make them feel more accessible, more attainable, or more applicable than they previously did. So without further ado, here are 7 things that you probably already know you should be doing, but might be struggling to implement into your life. And the first is doing things that you are scared to do. In other words, exposure therapy, facing your fears. Your comfort zone only grows when you are not in it. This is critical for you to understand. And engaging in activities that cause you anxiety or that cause you discomfort it's kind of like stretching your emotional range in the same way that something like yoga or calisthenics is like stretching your movement range. It doesn't necessarily feel great while you are doing it. In fact, it can often be an unpleasant experience while you're doing it. But if you do it regularly, navigating the world becomes more enjoyable and less painful, and you're less likely to get hurt. If you stretch regularly, you are less likely to hurt your body when you're out and about and moving around, and there's fewer situations that you're unable to physically navigate, right? When you practice regular exposure therapy, and work on in sort of a planned, strategic manner, facing and hopefully eventually conquering the things you are afraid of, the world starts to open up to you. It becomes more accessible and less scary because there are fewer situations you can imagine that you would find yourself in that overwhelm your anxiety. This is a huge part of why I used to be so isolated when I was younger. It's because I was terrified of doing literally everything other than playing video games in my room, to be honest with you. And so I avoided people, I avoided opportunity, I avoided school, I avoided work, because I felt like I had so few skills and so little coping ability that it was only a matter of time before I'd encounter a situation that would completely overwhelm me. So I didn't enter situations, like literally, I just didn't. The more confidence you have about your ability to navigate these stressful situations, the less scary life becomes and the more opportunities you have. The second thing that you probably already know you should be doing, but might be struggling to do, is taking good care of your living space. Unless you are an absurdly wealthy person, you are going to spend the vast majority of your life in 2 environments: the place that you work and the place that you live. Now, the place you live, you might own your entire home, you might rent, you might have a room, you might have a condo, whatever you have an environment that you call home. And so these 2 environments, your work and your home, they have a tremendous impact on your mental health, if for no other reason, I should say, than volume. They're where you spend the majority of your time. And so the way they look, the way they feel, the way they function is critical to your emotional well-being. We know that the environments that you spend your time in have a huge impact on your mental health. And basically what it comes down to for me, my phrasing is, If your home doesn't feel comfortable to you, you basically never feel like you're home. It's like you don't have a home, you don't have a space. You have a home, but what you don't have is a space in this world that feels right to you. That's what you're missing. And we all need that, and I believe we all deserve that, but you will not have one unless you make one. You're the one that has to create and maintain it. And I don't always like that either, but I don't make the rules, I just report on them. And this is the way we work. Taking good care of your environment can be a very time consuming task, especially if you've neglected it for a long time. But remember that you don't have to do it all at once, right? Start small, do a little bit each day, and before you know it, maybe your heart will have a home again. And that's something that can be invaluable for our mental health journeys. The third thing you probably already know you should be doing, but might be struggling to do, is to actually implement sleep hygiene techniques. There are two types of insomnia. There's clinical insomnia and there's behavioral insomnia. Clinical insomnia is when, for the most part, you are doing things right. Your day is structured in a way that should allow you to fall asleep and stay asleep reasonably well, but you are unable to do so, and it takes hours to fall asleep. Behavioral insomnia is when you have a double shot at 3 p.m., you get into bed at 11 p.m., you scroll on your phone till midnight, then you toss and turn until 3 in the morning. In other words, you have insomnia, but it's because of choices you're making. It's not because your brain doesn't know how to go to sleep. It's because you're not letting it go to sleep. And you've set up your life in a way that simply does not support sleep. Most people who struggle with sleep have behavioral insomnia, not clinical insomnia. Clinical insomnia is actually relatively rare, and it's usually a matter of lifestyle and habits that are primarily facilitating the experience of insomnia. So my question to you would be, are you actually practicing sleep hygiene and suffering clinical insomnia as a result, or are you self-sabotaging and then complaining about it? Because, not to put too fine a point on it, but that's basically what behavioral insomnia is. You are unintentionally, I know, I'm oversimplifying things a little bit. You're making it as difficult as possible for your brain to fall asleep and then being like, brain, why didn't you fall asleep? I mean, you're kind of gaslighting your sleep cycle in a sense. It's a weird way to think of it, I know, but that's kind of what you're doing. If you struggle with insomnia, take a real honest inventory of your nighttime routine and ask yourself, do I think it's reasonable that I should be able to fall asleep pretty quickly? Or am I basically taking everything I know about sleep, throwing it out the window and thinking that's still going to work? Because it won't. You have a brain and you have a nervous system, and we know a lot about how these factors affect our ability to fall asleep and stay asleep. And so sleep is not really a mystery. It's just that most people aren't doing it right. And that's really what I want you to consider if you're struggling with insomnia. Am I doing it right, or am I just gaslighting my own sleep cycle? The fourth thing that you probably already know you should be doing but might be having trouble with is minimizing or eliminating drug and alcohol use. Now, this one's a little bit different, I know, because this one is harder for a person to control directly than some of the other topics we're going to discuss here. And I believe me, I am understanding of that. Most people who use drugs and alcohol use them because they want to feel anything other than what it is like to be themselves. And it seems like nothing could possibly worse than just waking up today and feeling like me. And frankly, I know what that feeling is like. Substances put you on a physical and mental roller coaster, though, where instead of changing what it feels like to be you, which is ultimately the reality that you are struggling with, you are temporarily escaping what it feels like to be you. And when the escape wears off, you often feel even worse than before. And therefore, you feel an even stronger desire to escape from yourself, which manifests as increased substance use and creates a downward spiral that the longer it goes on, becomes harder and harder to extricate yourself from. So if this is you, I have a little bit of a different idea for you here, because everything else in this video has been all about here's what you can do. If you're struggling with drug and alcohol use, and the pattern I just described kind of sounds like you, maybe it's time to admit that you cannot do this alone and that you need some help with this problem. Substance misuse is probably the hardest mental health condition to treat without support. Maybe tied with eating disorders, because they're very similar neurologically. And I think that's mainly because it's so easy to lie to yourself. And, most people aren't deceiving themselves about their depression or their anxiety. It's like, well, it's not that bad. Like, usually you face those things pretty head on. You're like, no, this is awful and I need help. But when it comes to things that produce a momentary sense of reward, like eating disorders and substance misuse, you tend to rationalize, you tend to explain, you tend to minimize, you tend to make excuses. And if you've had several unsuccessful attempts at changing those habits for yourself, maybe it's time to stop putting so much pressure on yourself to accept some help and to accept some support in this domain. There is no shame in that. This is typically not a solo endeavor, and it might be time to think about asking for help. The fifth thing that you probably already know you should be doing, but might be having a hard time doing, is being physically active every day. So, I mean, this one is no mystery, right? You've probably had a million people tell you this already, including your doctor every time you see him and every other medical professional you interact with. You've probably heard it so many times that you're sick of hearing it and you have an innate automatic defensive response when someone says this to you. So, sorry about that, because I probably just triggered it. But here's the thing. Your brain needs blood. Your brain does not work very well if it does not have healthy, accessible blood flow. It's literally one of the resources your brain runs on. It's like gasoline for your brain. And most of us have very sedentary lifestyles, which negatively impact our cardiovascular health. I mean, that's just the way society has. It's not your fault. That's the way society has gone. Most jobs don't use our bodies. If you have a very physically active job, you probably don't need to worry about this because you are physically active every day. It doesn't have to be extra, right? It doesn't have to be prescribed exercise. If you get this in from your job or from your kids or whatever, fine. But if you're like me and you literally just sit on your butt for 9 hours a day at work, you need to add this in. Your predefined life doesn't have enough of it. I'm not a fan of how society has made us so sedentary, but it is what it is. Since your brain needs blood to work right, cardiovascular health is brain health. If you constantly feel foggy, forgetful, distracted, or moody, it might be because your brain doesn't have enough blood flow. It might be because your brain doesn't have one of the resources it needs to keep your prefrontal cortex powered on, because all the things that I just said live there. And when your brain is lacking in any essential resource, blood, oxygen, rest, or caloric energy, it enters a low power mode, much like what's on your phone or your tablet or your laptop, and certain processes don't work as well as they normally do. The first part of the brain that takes the hit when we're low on resources is the prefrontal cortex. It's executive functioning, it's emotion regulation, it's social engagement. So if those are things you're struggling with, it's probably because your brain doesn't have all the resources it needs to do its job properly. The one thing I always try to emphasize with physical activity too is like the way you do it really doesn't matter. If you want to lift weights, lift weights. If you want to run, run. If you want to do team sports, do team sports. Like if you hate some certain type of exercise, don't do it. It's not hugely critical how you do it. It's just critical that you do it. So find something that you either like, ideally. If there's nothing, like literally nothing, find the thing you hate the least. It can be some weird, obscure thing. Maybe you want to get into hobby horsing. And if you don't know what that is, you should look it up on social media. It's a fascinating world. If you do know what it is, I appreciate the people who understand my obscure references because there are many of them. Just do something to get that blood going to your brain. You might be amazed how much it helps. You really might be amazed. And the sixth and final thing that you probably, asterisk to this one, probably know you should be doing, but are probably having trouble doing, is to stop beating yourself up about how long it is taking to get your life in order. Now, I realize that you might have been doing that throughout this video already, because as I'm saying things that you probably already knew you should be doing, you might have been beating yourself up, guilt-tripping yourself, shaming yourself, and if you were, knock it off right now. Sorry, I had to say it that way. But seriously, you're not doing yourself any favors. We all have enough pressure on us already. Probably more than enough pressure, probably a maladaptive amount of pressure. And change is hard. Our brains actively resist it because they're wired for homeostasis. We associate familiarity with safety and with security. And on a very basic survival level, we fight back against our own attempts to change. Putting too much pressure on yourself tends to keep you stuck. So try patience and gentleness instead and see what happens. It is amazing what people can do when they finally feel understood and are treated with respect and compassion. And it is very possible that the person most standing in your way of feeling those things and experiencing those things is you.